Psychologists have uncovered a single cognitive bias that quietly sabotages your happiness every day. It operates beneath conscious awareness and is so deeply wired into human decision-making that most people can't detect it even when it's explained to them directly. This bias doesn't make you irrational. It makes you consistently dissatisfied, even when your life objectively improves. Researchers call it impact neglect, and it's the brain's tendency to underestimate how quickly you will emotionally recover from negative events. The result? You fear the wrong things, chase the wrong goals, and misjudge what will or won't make you happy. The shocking part is that this bias doesn't just distort your expectations, it alters your biology. fMRI studies show that when people imagine a future setback, the brain reacts as if it will last far longer than it actually would. Regions responsible for emotional calibration stay hyperactive, creating a misleading signal that the upcoming experience will be overwhelmingly painful. But when the event finally happens, the emotional impact fades much faster than predicted. Your brain essentially lies to you about your own resilience. This bias also explains why people stay in toxic relationships, dead-end jobs, and unfulfilling routines. The brain overestimates the emotional cost of change while underestimating how quickly adaptation kicks in. Experiments using longitudinal happiness tracking revealed that even major life disruptions, breakups, relocations, job changes, usually lose their emotional weight within weeks. Yet people remain stuck, believing the transition will destroy them. The bias traps you not by fear, but by miscalculated fear. Researchers noticed something even stranger. Impact neglect doesn't only operate with negative events. It also affects positive ones. When people anticipate future achievements, new income, a promotion, a relationship, they imagine a long-lasting happiness boost. But emotional adaptation neutralizes the high long before expected. This is why people who accomplish their dream goals often feel strangely empty afterward. The mind exaggerates both sides of the emotional spectrum, pain and pleasure, making long-term happiness impossible to sustain. One groundbreaking study showed that this bias activates more intensely in environments with constant comparison. Social media amplifies the distortion because the brain evaluates imagined futures through the lens of others' curated highlights. When you compare your life to the imagined peak moments of others, your mind creates unrealistic emotional forecasts. You expect too much from the future, too little from yourself, and no matter what happens, you end up disappointed. The evolutionary roots of the bias are counterintuitive. Early humans needed to overestimate threats because failing to anticipate danger meant death. But the environment also contained long periods of monotony, which gave the brain opportunities to recalibrate expectations naturally. Modern life lacks these recalibration windows. Constant stimulation keeps the bias active at all times, making your emotional predictions wildly inaccurate, far worse than those of your ancestors. This bias also sabotages relationships. Experiments show that people consistently underestimate how quickly they forgive others. They believe arguments will permanently damage the relationship, even though emotional equilibrium often returns in a day or two. Because of this miscalculation, people avoid difficult conversations, end relationships prematurely, and misinterpret temporary emotions as permanent truths. The brain protects you by exaggerating the danger of conflict but ends up making you lonelier. Neurologists discovered that the bias hijacks your reward system. When you anticipate a painful experience, dopamine drops before the event even occurs. In other words, the unhappiness is pre-installed. And when the experience turns out to be less painful than expected, a common outcome, the dopamine rebound is too small to compensate. This pattern slowly conditions you to avoid harmless experiences, shrinking your world over time. Even more disturbing is how the bias shapes your identity. People often define themselves using predictions about what would make them happy or unhappy. But because these predictions are consistently wrong, the identity becomes built on emotional hallucinations rather than reality. Instead of living based on real experiences, you live based on inaccurate forecasts from a primitive survival mechanism. Your imagined future self overrides your actual present self. Researchers now argue that overcoming this single bias may improve happiness more than gratitude practices, meditation, or therapy. The solution isn't positive thinking, it's accurate thinking. When people learn to distrust their emotional forecasts, their behavior changes dramatically. They take more risks, recover faster, and stop clinging to imagined disasters or imagined highs. The mind becomes calmer not because life gets easier, but because the brain finally stops miscalculating the emotional impact of everything that happens. You don't become happier by changing your life. You become happier by correcting the one bias that has been distorting your emotional reality since the day you were born.